So, drawing shapes, getting into the actual editing of the shapes after the fact. We draw our shape, we can control our size, and in the transform panel, which we're going to have up quite often, I know a lot of people probably aren't used to this simply because our control bar normally was just our fill and our stroke up here, and you'd have to constantly keep clicking on your transform panel in order to get your size and your shape. This is really handy to have: rotation, shear, width and height, and then your proportions here, angle of rotation, and all of the corners as well. Adobe has gone in and tried to simplify your little points here a bit. It's always been somewhat of an issue when you're dealing with an object here and trying to get to your little pull handles and your pull points as well. So using the selection tool and the direct selection tool here, very important. Obviously with the selection tool, I can click on my shapes, I can move my shapes around, click on any of the pull handles here, and I can simply click and drag, and this allows me to reshape my object. Hover outside the corners of any object, I get my little double-ended arrows, which then allows me to rotate my object. And when I rotate my object, I can see my little tool hint right there. Of course, hold down my Shift key, and Shift is going to constrain as well. There are other ways to rotate objects. Once we get into the rotate tool, we're going to blow your mind. Lots of great rotation things. But these are just the very basics, because even though people use this stuff, there's always something that they don't know. When it comes to actually going in and editing the object shape here, this is extremely important. So when I go in and I want to edit the shape freely beyond just the size and the angle of rotation here, that's where my direct selection tool comes into play. And a lot of people have told me, well, you know, there really is no difference between the selection tool and the direct selection tool, because look, if I take my selection tool, I can move it and I can change the shape. But when I go to my direct selection tool, I can't go in and I can't change those points because the entire thing moves with it. So it really doesn't do any difference, and it's kind of hit and miss. Sometimes I'm able to select the point, and sometimes I'm not able to select the point. Here's the trick, folks. If you learn nothing else, this is what you learn. When you are switching between the selection tool and the direct selection tool, here's what you do. If you switch to your selection tool while you have your object selected, if you switch to your direct selection tool, it's going to have every single point selected on your object. Therefore, when you try to do something with your direct selection tool, every single point is going to move, and it gives you the impression that it's just like your selection tool. Yes, because every point is selected. Out of habit, I simply go to my direct selection tool and I tap outside what it is that I'm doing just to deselect my object, and then I click or I drag over my object there to now go in and select a very specific point. And so when I have that, I've got that right there, there's my point, and I can actually see that little anchor right there, and that little anchor right there shows me that it's not selected. Very, very, very important. So I'm going to show you that one more time here so you can actually see. There's my selection tool. I get all my pull handles. Click over to the direct selection tool right there, and everything is selected. If I want to have a specific handle or something selected, I'm going to click off with my direct selection tool. I'm going to click back on. If I want to select a certain point, I can either click and drag over that certain point to make it active, which, by the way, see that? That's empty, that's empty, that's empty. Those are not active. When they're filled, they're active, which means if I then want to move any of these objects here, I can simply take my selection, my direct selection tool here, and either click on that point to select it, or click and drag over that point, or click and drag over multiple points, and then only those points are selected. Okay? Very common problem. So there it is, folks. If your object is selected with your selection tool and you go over to your direct selection tool, every single thing is selected, and therefore everything acts together. Click off it, click back on it, and now you can go in and hover over your points there. If they're empty, they are not selected. Once they become solid, they are selected and therefore editable. And I know people are like, oh my gosh, is that all it is? Yes, that's all it is. just a point of selection right there. And you hover over them. The one frustrating thing with this is that, of course, if I go in and I zoom in here and I do that, every time I zoom in, my little points seem to get even smaller. I wish they made the points a lot bigger so that I can actually see those. And there is a preference in here that allows you to go in and set your anchor point displays so that you can actually see them right here. So I can control the size of my handles, my little end things there, but I would also love to get a little bit more anchor right there. But you can go in and change certain aspects of your pull handles there and edit those things right there in your preferences. So there it is. We're going to spend a lot of time with the direct selection tool because we will need to go in and we will need to edit our line segments, edit our points, and be able to manipulate and use those because it's all about the basic construction of our objects. A couple other things that we have with our line tools as well. Taking our line tool and drawing any sort of line. We do have just our basic stroke up in our control bar here. And next to that, any of the links here that we see in the control bar are just little drop-down panels. And unlike all the other Adobe applications here, we have the links in the control bar, whereas the other Adobe applications, we can actually go into the window menu. And we can do the same here. It's just that these links are quite nice to have. So if I have a stroked line, I can also call up my stroke panel by going into my window menu. Well, I don't need my stroke panel all the time. It's nice just to have the link here for it, but I can just call that up. So working with my stroke weight on my objects, I can go in and I can control my lines. Now, anything to deal with my line here is going in and dealing with the cap of the line. By default, you can see that the lines end right there at the individual point. I can round those ends, which gives me a rounded end to the line here, and we're going to use that. It can be a look. You can either have the chopped off ends, and then you can also have your squared ends that are then going to run all the way around the line. Visually, you really can't tell the difference between the projecting cap and the butt cap, but the rounded cap, if we're going to have that, is going to be rounded right there. The corner points are going to be for any container that we have, or any shape other than a line. And if I draw a container here, and I have my corners, and I go into my stroke here, and I do a rounded corner, this is different than going on and doing a radius corner. A rounded corner is going to go in, and it's only going to round the outside of the stroke. You can see my actual container here is not rounded at all. It is simply going in and rounding just the stroke, okay? Because we are in our stroke panel right here. Very, very, very important. And I can flatten those edges there. This is not a radius corner. This is the actual stroke. When I radius the corner of my objects, then it's radiusing my object and it has nothing to do with the stroke. And one other really weird thing when we get to strokes right here, and this is something that doesn't come up very often, but I like to share this. I'm going to go in with my star tool and I'm going to create a lot of points right here. And I've got my star tool, like so, and I go into my stroke here and I'm going to have butt caps right there, so that I've got that. Do you notice how when I do my caps right here, they all have a very blunt end to them? Well, if I go and I reduce the stroke here and reduce the stroke, what I'd like to have is I'd love to have like really sharp ends. And it's like, wait a second, okay, those have really sharp ends on them, but these have really blunt ends. What's going on here that's not going on here? This one ends at the end with a very blunt cap, and this one ends with a really sharp cap. What is going on? How do I get that? And I notice that when I go through here and I reduce the size of my stroke, that there's certain points where all of a sudden those points will go away and I'll get flat ones and I won't get pointy ones. It's like, okay, that's really weird. Well, a little obscure thing that you probably never knew is what we have is what's called the miter limit here. And the miter limit allows us to go in and control those little points. So check this out. The miter limit is set to 10. I don't know what the magic is with the numbers here, but I can tell you that if I reduce the miter limit, do you notice how those little spikes go away in the center of my object? Now I have blunt ends. I increase the miter limit, and what that's going to do is when I increase the miter limit, that's going to go ahead and then give me the super sharp points. So how this is actually measured, okay, is this. So if I reduce my miter limits, my points go away, get very blunt ends. Increase the miter limit, it's going to go ahead and give me those spikes. So how this actually works is the tighter the angle of my object, so think of a point of a triangle, the tighter the angle of my point, I have to set my miter limit higher in order to get those little spikes to pop out. So if I do want those spikes, and I have a very, very, very narrow angle, I'm going to need a very high number for my miter limit. If I have a very wide angle, I can have a lower number for my miter limit. I don't know what the magic is with a number. I just put it so that I either get blunt ends or I get pointy ends. So same object here, miter limit of 26, again no magic to the number, and a miter limit of 5 completely changes the look of my object. And again, this has everything to do with the actual stroke on my object. Nothing happens when I do this with my fill. This is all with just the stroke. So I can round the caps of my lines, I can round the stroke of my object, and I can also control the miter limit, so whether I have little pointies or little flatties, right there, again, all with just the stroke. If there is no stroke on the object here, the miter limit means nothing whatsoever. It just simply becomes the object, and I have those points. It's when I introduce the stroke. And the stroke is going to be a point of contention as we go through here and do this, especially with a Pathfinder tool, but it's something that is kind of cool and interesting, just in case you ever wanted to know. And if you never knew, now you know. So with our line tool as well, dealing with our strokes, with our stroke panel, we can go in and we can add some arrowheads to our object as well. And while these are great, you know, I find them to be a little bit cheesy with stuff, you know, especially like this. Definitely don't want to have, you know, kind of crazy stuff here. While it's cute and fun, infographics can be cute and fun, but in a much more graphically organized way. The one thing that I do like about putting strokes in Illustrator is that I can control the size of my heads and tails here independently of the line. In design, you can't. You have to go in and you have to control the line weight, which then controls your stop and your start right here. And there are some interesting ends that we can do here with little dangling participles, things like that. But in general, I may use this for the basis of something. But when we start getting connectors and callouts and pointers here, I generally don't use arrows when it comes to infographics. There's a lot of other ways. Arrows are very cliche. If we're going to hit somebody over the head, we're going to do it in a much more subtle way than actually saying, here, this is the value. It points to this particular object right there. I get it. We're going to show you how to do connector lines. If you do want to use arrows here and you do want to use your stroke right here, you certainly can. We can then go in, and we'll show you more of this. I can go into the object menu and I can expand the appearance, which then allows me to go in and actually take these items and use them separately and not have it be part of the path. We're going to break all these items apart, expanding the appearance, breaking these apart, and being able to isolate these things as we go. Because again, it's all about the simplified construction of these items right there. And I'm just going to back up here because I'm sure people are like, what was that? Well, when I create a line here, these are actual additional objects on the line. And if I want to break them out into those specific objects, yes, I could have made this all by myself with those items, but I can go into my object menu and I can expand the appearance. Expanding the appearance is basically breaking everything out into its own basic building blocks. And then I have the ability to have access to these right away so that I can go in here and access those right there and bring everything apart. Therefore, I don't have to work with the item as one single component. Lots of fun stuff to do, and that's all going through and just using the stroke panel right there. One last thing with the stroke panel, going in, if we want to create a dashed line of some sort, and of course, we can go ahead and we can apply our dashed line. And we don't really have a whole bunch of different lines that we can create or use in Illustrator. We have to go in and actually create our own as we go. So I can create some kind of dotted line here as well if I want to show something spiraling out of control. there isn't a real list of all different types of lines and strokes here. We end up making our own in Illustrator. So one of the things that you probably see me doing, moving around the page constantly, is going in and getting my hand tool, using that. Yes, I can go over to my hand tool here. Yes, the keyboard shortcut for that is H. The space bar. Hold down the space bar. Anytime you hold down the space bar, no matter what tool you're in, what mode you're in, hold the space bar down and you get the hand tool. So I may be working on an object here in my direct selection tool. I've got something selected. I want to move it. Space bar. Move it. Doesn't change tools. It only changes to the hand tool while I have that held down. I can move whatever I want to, hold down the space bar, rejigger the whole thing, goes right back to the tool that I was using. Also, the zoom tool, you see me calling that up quite often, it's Command space bar. And Command space bar is going to give me my zoom tool. Because I'm constantly zooming in and zooming out of things, Command space bar gives me my zoom tool. I'm going to click and drag over what it is that I want to be editing and working with. Again, once I let go of those tools, it goes right back to the tool that I was working with right there. Quick and easy ways to zoom in and zoom out you have right here are your Command plus and your Command minus. Your fit to window is Command 0. I use those all the time to zoom out. Command 0, zoom right out. Command plus if I want to zoom in to whatever it is that I have selected. Command minus to zoom out. A couple other shortcuts if you want to have even more shortcuts there. Double click on the hand tool in the toolbar. That's going to fit everything to the window. Double click on the zoom tool. It's going to fit everything actual size. And if you ever wanted to know what zoom rate you're actually at, up here in your control bar, or right under your control bar and the title of your document, it tells you right there. Command 0 tells me I'm at 72%, fit it all to the window. Command 1, 100%. So double click on the zoom tool, 100%. Double click on the hand tool right there. So anything that I'm doing, space bar gives me the hand tool. Command space bar gives me the zoom tool. Command 0, fit to page. Command 1, 100%. Command plus zooms in. Command minus zooms out. Just more little fun stuff to learn.